I don't think any of us are expecting perfect parents. We are expecting parents who are accountable, who can say, yeah, I made a mistake. And if I could go back and do it differently, I would do it like this. I think that if we had parents who could be that reflective and, and acknowledge their own humanity. Humans make mistakes, right?
Mhm.
And I can look at everything that my mother did and I can say, yeah, she made a lot of mistakes. But I'm the only one who's saying that. And that's the problem.
This is the Bad Mothers Podcast, where we dive deep into our maternal urges, or lack thereof. We talk about the mothers we left or who left us, and whether they haunt our own choices about having children. This week we return to our roots with a discussion of maternal estrangement with Megan Margherio. Megan is an author and trauma-informed embodiment coach. Her work is shaped by both lived experience, childhood trauma, estrangement, and complex PTSD, and a deep study in nervous system repair and somatic healing. Her debut memoir, Everwoven, a memoir, a reckoning, is a raw, lyrical journey through estrangement, emotional survival, and the long, slow return to self. Megan's story is quite harrowing, but her self-awareness and strength is truly an inspiration, and I hope this conversation is helpful to others in similar situations. Please be aware that we discuss sexual and physical abuse in the course of this conversation. Finally, a reminder that our very first Estrangement Book Club meeting is on December 4th, and we're talking about Jennette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died. You can register to join us at the link in the show notes. Hope to see you there. Thank you, Megan, for being here and for contacting me about your memoir and your experience with your mom. Well, your family, really. It's a much bigger story than just your mother. So I want to start with pointing out first that your parents weren't together for most of your life, your biological parents, and you lived with your mother and stepfather, who, under their care, you endured abuse and neglect. And you write about how from a young age you had to abandon yourself. That was one of I think one of the first things that sort of jumped out at me from your book is that you realized you had to not be who you are. And that, of course, had big ramifications for the rest of your life. But how did you see that happening in retrospect when you look back?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It means a lot.
Oh,
And yeah, yeah, it absolutely. I don't think at the moment that I realized what I was doing, that it was self-abandonment. It was like a little piece of me here, a little piece of me there kind of thing. And it was more just recognizing that in the family dynamics that I grew up in, I was kind of, it was a dysfunctional family, and I became the scapegoat from the outset. Like there was nothing
mhm.
I could have done that would have changed that. Like it was pretty clear, as I reflect back on it now, that like I was always meant to be the one that they were going to target as being the problem. And what was problematic for me was that I was a highly enthusiastic little kid who loved to learn, who like loved people, who was just like openly in love with life. And when you grow up in a family that believes joy is something to be suspicious of, then that means I'm something to be suspicious of when I'm being
Mm,
joyful. And so those pieces of me, that excitement started to be things that I would contain, that I would be like, well, I'm not going to
mm,
share that with others when I'm excited or interested in something. I'm not going to share that. And then it was just like small things over time. Like one of my goals when I was a little kid was to read the encyclopedias, all of them. Like, and I did almost all of them, but I wouldn't tell anybody I was because that was nerdy. My family would have made fun of me. It would have been problematic. It's not a good idea to be too smart. And
mm,
so it was like those kinds of things. And so I just started to hide those parts of me away. And I stopped asking for help if I needed it because I knew help wasn't coming. So I started to just rely on me to be able to survive. And so it really became whatever I had to let go of, whatever it was that they didn't like. I tried to figure out how to either silence or at least just shove down so that they didn't have to
Hmm.
deal with my dramatic behavior or my extraness or whatever it is. And so, and I, as I look back on it now, I can see that through line
Hmm.
of just abandonment, that in the moment I didn't realize that's what I was doing. I thought I was the problem,
Hmm.
but it, as I look at it now, obviously I don't see it that way. I see it as a misfit between me and them in terms of
Yeah. And
personality or whatever.
that's such a, I think that that term self-abandonment is an important one because, so much of what we talk about with estrangement, it can be hard to define how our parents hurt us. And it might sound trivial to other people. Like if you just said offhand to a person, oh, well, my parents, thought I was being silly by reading the whole encyclopedia. Others would easily dismiss that and think, oh, well, that's just like a quirky thing your parents did. That's not harmful. But compounded and as a through line in your life, it really sounds like it diminished you and it didn't allow you to, children, I think, we're defined by our families and how our families see us. So that takes something really important and probably developmental from you from a young age, didn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're so right. Like in isolation, each of these things, like they don't sound that bad, right? Like it's
Hmm.
like, okay, they made fun of me for being nerdy. Like who
Hmm.
cares, right? Like that's not that big
Yeah.
of a deal. Like like families tease one another, like whatever.
Hmm.
Except that when you look at it when like from the outside now, like with a little bit more of that like kind of mile high lens, I look at it and I can see it so differently because I was trying to figure out who I was as a person while living with them.
Hmm.
And so I'm trying to find like so self-abandonment is one thing when you know the self. It's an entirely different thing when you're still trying to figure the self out.
Hmm.
And the people who are supposed to know you and love you no matter what are constantly pointing out the ways in which yourself is wrong. And they're wanting you to modify, adjust, change. And so you're growing up like with this overwhelming feeling of, I am wrong. There is something inherently wrong because I'm the common denominator in
Hmm.
all of this,
Hmm.
and so it's hard not to see it as that, and that's kind of the problem with like obviously dysfunctional family systems just in general, but then when you are like kind of the scapegoat as a child and you don't understand what's happening. And so the only way to internalize it is that I'm the problem because internalizing it as, well, they're the problem. The people who are supposed to protect and love me are the problem. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Like that
Yeah.
shakes the very foundation of everything. And so if I'm the problem and if I can internalize it as I'm the problem and I have to fix myself, and I have to walk around with that and think like, that it's me that needs to do something, then that's safer. And, in
Hmm.
so many ways in the minds of a child, that's so much safer to be the
Right. Right.
problem than to let your parents be the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrifying to think that your parents are doing something wrong or that it's them that's wrong. I mean, in some ways, I think it's just as a child, it's impossible to even imagine that that's the case, right? So, as you say, you wind up just blaming yourself and figuring out how I can change. And I want to get onto this later, but it seems relevant. That's something that you carry on then throughout your life, isn't it? And you describe how that played out in your relationship with your ex-husband and
Mhm.
how he basically used those things that you picked up as a child against you. And I do want to get into that more, but I think that's an important point is it's not just something that happens when we're kids. It can carry through our lives. And that's something that I recognized when I read your story. But going back just a
Yeah.
little bit, When you originally planned to move out of your mother's house, and live with your father, she made herself a martyr. And so you were originally convinced that she wouldn't care one way or the other because she didn't really seem to pay attention to you or care about what happened to you. But then you wrote that she said, "Look what you're doing to me. You're crushing me." How did you feel when you heard those words? And was there any part of you that believed it? Because in a way, it's something that maybe I can imagine you wish to hear from someone you want to love you, right? But on the other hand, you must have known that they were hollow. So, can you talk about that a little bit?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So she it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because out of one side of her mouth, she is saying, like, oh my gosh, you're crushing me. I can't believe you're leaving. And she's crying. And you think like, oh, that's the sign of someone who loves you and and they're begging you to stay. Except that that wasn't really what was going on. It was that from the very beginning, when I told her, when I was 14, when I made the decision to go and leave her house and move in with my dad, and that was following 3 years of pretty intense physical and sexual abuse from a foster child that my mother and stepfather then adopted. So when he was removed from the home for other kind of reasons, not what he did to me, because they didn't believe what he did to me. But when he was removed from the home, she became very aggressive with me, and blamed me for his removal. And so I'm watching her say these things, right? Like, you're crushing me, you're leaving me, I can't believe you're doing this. But really, what it is that she was trying to preserve face. So, growing up with my mother, she was a professional masker. I mean, truly. So, she was one person when you went out in public and a completely different person at home. So, at
Mm,
home, if I wasn't perfect, I was useless. I just didn't exist. And so perfection was the expectation. And then out in public, she couldn't wait to brag about how smart I was. A 9 out of 10 on something was worthy of being bragged about,
mm,
but not worthy of being loved. And
mm,
so that was kind of what it was like to live with her. And so I've known my whole life that that's who she was, is that she says one thing out of one side of her mouth and another out of the other. And so I knew listening to her like that wasn't real. And it wasn't about keeping me. It was about beating my dad. She didn't want my dad to win, and winning meant I was choosing him over her. So she just wanted to be the choice, but she didn't want to actually have to follow through with what that meant of
mm.
providing a loving home and those kinds of things. She just wanted to be the one I chose. When I didn't choose her, like that was deeply problematic.
Mm. And I imagine that's if she has that mask in public, then if you don't live with her anymore, then she has to explain to other people why
Yeah.
you don't live with her anymore, and that's an embarrassment for her. So
Yeah, and
I
especially
understand.
like yeah, I grew up in a really small town of like 55 people, so everybody knew everybody. And so for her, yes, it was very much like I've got to keep up appearances. But what she discovered was that I went and stayed with my dad for a month prior to like fully deciding to move in with him. And while I was gone for that month, she had to explain my absence, and her church folks were so like sad for her, and they felt bad for her. They put her on the on a prayer list at church, and that's when she discovered being the victim meant a lot better attention than just being the mom of a perfect kid or whatever the case might be. So she loved victimhood, and like leaned into it pretty hard.
Part of what I want bad mothers to do is help legitimize all kinds of choices for women. So obviously this podcast is meant to support people who are estranged, but it's also about all types of women who don't have kids, who do have kids, different kinds of mothers, making different choices. Um, and regarding marriage and family, when you I don't remember if it was when you were first engaged when you were young or before you got married, you said you wrote, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what comes next. But it was with sort of a weight of you weren't really sure if it's what you truly wanted. Can you expand more on that for us? How you worked through those feelings or
Yeah,
didn't?
so well, I was like, yeah, I really didn't. To be honest, I by the point in which I mean, and I want to preface all of this to say that I love my son, and so I'm grateful to have him. So please know that. But I never thought about whether or not I wanted to be a mother. It was literally just what came next, and my feelings about it, or even just the idea of interrogating my own feelings about it, never really entered into like kind of the equation at all because I was more, well, one, I was used to abandoning whatever it is I wanted. So I didn't even consider it at that point. Like it never
Mm,
factored in. But then two, it was like in the ways in which I was kind of like raised, traditional family, if you don't have that child, like, what's up? Why are you not like, kind of thing. So it was one of those things where it was like, what happened to you? Like that, that was problematic in the family that I grew up in because
mm,
children were part of the expectation. And so when my ex-husband and I talked about having children, it was like it wasn't even a consideration. It was an automatic. Well, yeah, it's just about the timing. It wasn't about the actual concept of do we even do this?
mm,
And as I think about it now, as I reflect back on it now, I look at like the decision that I made, and I'm glad that I made the choice that I made to have my son. But I don't know. I guess I don't know if I would have actually sat down and thought about it, what that actually meant, because I hadn't actually considered my mother wounds of any kind at that point. I was still
mm,
just trying to survive. And in fact, I was trying to survive my ex-husband. And so
mm,
I was so far down that I just stopped seeing myself as a person or someone who had the right to make any kind of choice.
mm, mm. How do you think motherhood changed your perspective of your mother? And did it offer any insights to your relationship with your ex-husband? I mean, I know from reading your book that your son, did change the dynamic. So can you talk about how just that responsibility of motherhood changed how you saw those relationships?
Yeah, so um I always knew growing up that my mother was a bad mother. Like she was never someone that I thought like, oh, she's the standard and that like, the good mothers that were out there were the anomaly. I knew that my mother was the anomaly. And so like kind of growing up, I've always saw my mother as someone who was kind of the example of what not to do. And so when I became a mother myself, a lot of the questions that I would ask when I didn't know what to do would be, well, what would my mother do? And then do the opposite of that.
Mm,
Hard left from that. And so that was kind of how I operated. But with my son, he changed everything for me because like and I write about this in the book. Like as I vividly remember the moment it all changed. Like with my ex-husband, I was holding my son and I was literally rocking him back and forth. And my ex-husband got mad and he choked me, and while holding our 9-month-old son, and I like left, like I got out of that, like right, and I went into our bedroom, closed the door, held, I was still holding our son, and I just looked down at him and I thought, I have one choice here and I have to go because the other options are that I stay and he grows up thinking that this is what love looks like. And it's obviously not. And I didn't want that for him. Or option two was that he knew that it wasn't what love looked like. And then he would look at his mother and be like, why is my mother staying? Why is she tolerating this? Like, is
mm,
she weak? Is she these things? And I didn't want him to see me that way. And so I knew that the only way that he was ever going to have a true chance to see what love could really be, what a healthy relationship could look like, was if I got out. And so I made that decision right then and there, holding him, at 9 months old. And it took 2 extra years beyond that before I actually got out. But I made the choice then. And it was because I knew that like my job in that moment was to protect him. And that's the piece that my mother failed at,
Mm-hmm.
was that she was unable to protect me, or unwilling, whichever it is. I don't really know. But I wasn't going to make that same mistake. And so again, it was that question of what would my mother do? Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna do the hard thing, the scary thing. I'm not gonna stay in something that is dangerous simply because it's financially stable. I'm gonna get out of this and I'm gonna go and find whatever comes next. And so that became the choice, is because I chose to protect my kid because I knew what it felt like to not be protected, and I wasn't gonna do that to him.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it really made me sick to read it and to hear it again. That is terrifying. And it was incredibly brave of you to find a way out of that, especially with as you talk about in the book, all the hurdles that were there for you because of I don't know what to call it, but your husband, well, he belittled you. He kept you from pursuing career options. So you had limited resources and choices in order to get out of that relationship. So it sounds like it was very difficult and amazing that you got through that. Um, can you maybe, since we're on the subject of your ex, can you explain how some of the experiences you had with your mom translated into, poor relationship choices later on? Because I think that's something a lot of us, myself included, can relate to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's kind of about like familiarity, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
like, the familiarity that I had growing up with like kind of relationships and with love was that if someone's like yelling at me, if they're belittling me, if they are making me the problem, well, that's familiar. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I knew love to be. So when I met my ex-husband, and it started off, in retrospect, he hit every single kind of red flag that I should have seen, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
for a potential abuser, the love bombing and all of those kinds of things. I should have seen it, except that I didn't, because the love bombing felt really good, right? It felt really
Mm-hmm.
amazing when you come from a house like where no one pays attention to you, and when they do, it's negative attention. To be love bombed and to be told that you're amazing and wonderful and all of these things, like that is so incredible, and it's also so addicting, because you just want to be good. At least for me, that's what it was, is that I was like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my God, someone sees value and worth in me. Like, and that meant that I was allowed to see a little bit of value and worth in myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I loved that. And then by the time it slipped into him being physically abusive, we had already hit the point where he was like tearing me down, telling me how stupid I was, telling me I was incapable. He had taken money away so that I had no idea about our finances. I had no idea how much money we had. I was living on an allowance. And none of those things felt wrong. It felt like he phrased it as, I'm doing you a favor because you're so incompetent. You
Mm-hmm.
can't handle money. Let me take this worry off of you, and I'll take care of all the finances. You just sit there and look pretty, kind of thing. And I was willing to do that because survival mode means you only have so much bandwidth to navigate the world. And so when someone's willing to take responsibilities off of your plate so that you can navigate the world, it seems like a little bit easier. That doesn't feel like control, it feels like relief. And
Mm-hmm.
that was, for me, that's what it felt like. And so I was just giving control away. Like, yes, please take the finances. Yes, please make all the decisions, all of that. Like, I don't want to have to have to do that. I don't want to have 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 And also, it meant I was keeping someone happy, and keeping someone happy meant keeping me safe. And that's, a lesson again that I learned from growing up in the house that I grew up in is as long as everyone's happy, I'm not in trouble. I'm not the problem. And so it just translated from from living at their house and like basically I feel like I was primed in so many ways for what came next with my abusive ex-husband. I feel like I was just like I don't know, I was ready for it, right? And not in that I wanted it or I was seeking it out, but that it was like because it didn't look abnormal to me, I was the exact right person who was going to fall into that situation.
Mm.
Because again, I've been taught my whole life that I'm the problem. And for me, love is transactional. And so I have to earn it. So what do I have to do? And I'm constantly going to have to be on guard for the ways in which I can earn it. And so when my ex-husband was saying the same thing, that was super familiar. Was like,
Mm.
oh, I
Mm.
have to earn love through you by being a good girl. Okay, yep,
Mm.
I know this. I know this script. I know what to do here. And so I continued doing the very thing that I was doing at home with my parents. I was doing
Mm.
again, and none of it looked abnormal until I had my son.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. I think so much of what is abnormal, if it's familiar to us, even if we know a little bit that maybe it's not right, if it's familiar, it's comfortable, no matter what it is, really. It could be abuse, but
Mm.
it's something that we know, at least. We know what to expect. We know how to manage it. So maybe it's less scary than something that's unfamiliar. It's crazy to me how often, how these patterns repeat. For me, when I first recognized it, it was like the scales fell from my eyes in that instant. As soon as someone pointed it out, I was, it was a whole new world. Um, and it was just incredible to me that I spent so long following those same patterns. Um, can you can you talk about so we said how you lived with your father for a short time.
Mhm.
Can you talk about your decision to become estranged from him and
Yeah.
yeah, how that I wanted to talk about it because as we were discussing earlier, it's always interesting how dismissive people are about children estranged from fathers. No one seems to pay much attention to that. It's when mothers aren't in the picture that people, sort of wonder what's going on. So can you talk about what happened with your dad if you're comfortable doing that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So my dad, when I was growing up, my dad had my sister and I every other weekend, and that was kind of the kind of plan all along. Is I was always going to live with my mother and everything, and then when everything went kind of sideways with my mother, and you know. It all just really came crashing down. I reached out to my dad and I was like, "Hey, I need to come live with you." And I didn't tell him about the sexual abuse. And so he died in 2017 and he died not knowing.
Mm.
Because I couldn't tell him because I felt like he was going to look at it and be like, "Oh, that's more than I can handle. I don't want to take that on," like whatever the case might be. And I just also I didn't at the time didn't have the words to kind of put to what I was experiencing. But even though I didn't have the words for it, I was still experiencing the fallout from it. So the PTSD was really kicking up with him during that time of living at his house. I was having to navigate a lot of flashbacks, a lot of panic attacks and things. And doing it without being caught, basically. So it was like meant to be kind of my little secret. And I was doing great. And with it, I really was like, I don't think a lot of people knew. And maybe, who knows, like maybe I actually wasn't doing as well as I thought, but nobody said anything to me. So I feel like I was probably covering it pretty well. But as I lived there, so I lived with my dad for 4 years, and as I was living with him, it became abundantly clear that I was not going to fit as myself. So I had spent, the first 14 years of my life learning how to manipulate myself to fit into the shape that, my mother would be happy with. And so she trained me on how to do that, on how to shape shift to fit her. And it was clear very quickly while living at my dad's, I was going to have to shape shift to fit him as well.
Mm.
And so for me, that really became, I abandoned absolutely everything about myself. And in order to get my dad to love me, because I really felt like it was my dad or no one. Um, and and so my dad was a rancher and he had horses. And so I loved horses. I pretended to love horses. I was out in the barn. I showed horses. I was constantly with my dad. I was like, if I can just be his mini me, then he'll love me. And that was effective. I mean, my dad and I spent a lot of time together. And then one day, when my stepmother got mad at me about something that I had said about my stepsister, I used the word slut, and I'm not proud of it, but that was me at 17. So,
Mm.
and my stepmom reacted, and my stepmom's reaction was to punch me in the face. And my dad was sitting at the table, and I will never forget it. He didn't say a word. He barely even looked up from he was eating toast, and he barely looked up from it. And I like was just horrified.
Mm.
And there was something about the fact that I had tried so hard to be loved by him, and the fact that I felt like I was making inroads, and that my dad was like wanting to spend time with me, and he seemed like he liked me, and all of these things that I thought my dad would stick up for me. I guess I just really did. I thought that he would. And when he said nothing and he allowed me to get hit and there was no consequences. And then he came to me afterwards and told me I needed to apologize to my stepmother for what I said. And and I just thought this doesn't make any sense. Why am I apologizing to the person who punched me? Her reaction,
Hmm.
she's the adult. Her reaction,
Right.
it was too much. And my dad didn't see it that way. And I remember sitting there and the heartbreak of seeing this person that I absolutely loved, worshiped, and thought this is my out. This is the one who's going to love me.
Hmm.
Watching him not like love me the way that I needed him to in that moment, to say it was wrong what she did, and you didn't deserve that. And he just could not give me that. It devastated me more than my own mother, like, and the betrayals of her, because I never gave her the chance to really want to love me because I knew early on that she wouldn't.
Hmm.
With my dad, I thought it was something different. And so that betrayal, it cut deeper. It just cut so much
Yeah.
deeper to feel that isolated and alone. And so kind of what we were talking about before, the familiarity over the one that you don't. With my dad, I knew to like lower my guard, or with my dad, I lowered my guard and I allowed a little bit of the love that he was trying to give. I let it come in. And then it crushed me. And so the walls went right back up. And I made the decision to go back and live with my mother because it was like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And I had gotten surprised by my dad, and my mother
Mm.
was never able to surprise me.
Mm.
And so that I went back and lived with her afterwards. And I remained estranged from my dad. Like we had these pockets here and there where we tried to like connect, reconnect or whatever, and we both knew it wasn't going to happen. It was
Mm.
just this. It was like it was the right thing to say, but not something we were going to do. And yeah, like when I would tell people I was estranged from my dad, no one batted an eye. No one thought anything of it. It wasn't strange or abnormal, and anything like that. But then, yeah, like when I went estranged from my mother 15 years ago, that was a totally different ball game. There was a lot more skepticism about me as a person when I said
Hmm.
I'm estranged from my mother than when I was estranged from my father.
Yeah, and I think that that comes down to the fact that we, as a society, believe mothers to be these, self-sacrificing which a lot of them are, caregivers, and we don't have the same expectation for fathers. So if a father is out of the picture, maybe it's believed that the child isn't missing out on so much, which is really unfair to a lot of dads. And as I said, unfair to the mothers as well, to I think to make them these self-sacrificing figures, right? I mean, it's a lot of pressure, I think, on moms. And so that introduces another, sort of complicated dynamic to this whole thing. Have you been able to rationalize your mother's treatment of you in any way? Or is there, how do you see her now, I guess, in retrospect, after I should say, you've done so much impressive work on yourself in the years that followed all of this. So has it given you any new perspectives on her and her treatment of you?
Yeah, yes and no. I think like so it's funny. I spent a lot of time in when I first started healing, thinking that healing meant if I could just get to the place that I could forgive them. If I could forgive, then I was healed.
Mm-hmm.
And I've long since let that go because I do think that there are some things that can be unforgivable, even if there are like actions can be unforgivable even if there are underlying reasons
Mm-hmm.
that maybe are a little bit more understood. And so for my mother, it's hard for me to know, right? Like what I know about my mother is that she never ever was willing to consider anything ever being her fault. She was never willing to consider her accountability, her role in things, nothing. And that hasn't changed. So, that's not going to change. What led to that, like why we kind of built a family and really like my mother, like, she was the dominating force in the family. And the entire like kind of familial universe, so to speak, kind of orbited around her. And so I don't know what she experienced as a child. I don't know, like I know what my grandmother was like with me. To know that she did have an example of a very maternal mother because my grandmother was very maternal with me.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what my mother experienced to know like how trauma might have played a role in what she kind of endured or what generational trauma might have
Mm-hmm.
done to kind of play here. But what I do know is that she didn't want to do the work. She didn't want to face the accountability for the actions that she had when called out for them. She directly lied about it,
Mm-hmm.
even though I had evidence to support like hey I know you did these things and she just couldn't accept that that's who she was. And so that is for me, I think that's enough to know like she's never going to change. So if I were ever going to reconsider like my kind of estrangement boundary, which I'm not, the only way that I ever would be that if she actually did any kind of fundamental work to see how she failed me as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And she has made it abundantly clear that that is not going to happen
Mm-hmm.
because she doesn't believe that she has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so important what you said about an action can be unforgivable regardless of what the reasons for it were or why how that person might have been hurting and acting out, right? Because I think we can have compassion for our parents and what might have made them treat us the way they did and still know it's unsafe for me to have a relationship with you, you know, without vilifying them, I guess. And that's what I've tried to do in, many years since I was estranged from my mother. I don't know. I don't know why she was the way she was. I can speculate. I'm not gonna hold I'm not gonna hold it against her for the rest of my life. I'm not angry about it anymore. It's just what happened. But I think we can do that and still know that it's not safe to have that relationship. And I think that's sort of the background that people miss in these estrangement stories is we're not all walking around with a big chip on our shoulder, angry about it. It's just this is the way our lives went. And, you know, wish it could be different, but it's not.
Yeah, and if you have to spend, you know, a big chunk of your life, or all of your adult life trying to undo the damage that was done from when you were little, and it's hard not to look at that and go, well, my life would have been so much easier
Mm,
if. My life would have been
yeah.
so much easier if my mother would have just loved me or would have just accepted me as I was or, would have believed me.
Hmm.
Like how different that would have been for me. And so when I say that something like an action can be unforgivable, that's what I mean. It's
Hmm.
unforgivable because I have to spend the rest of my life picking up the pieces from a choice I didn't make.
Right.
And I have to experience the consequences and the fallout of her choices because I was too little to
Hmm.
choose otherwise. I was too little to consciously choose for myself, and the adult didn't choose well. And, where like I guess I look at, who she is as a person and what she did to me now, like through the lens of an adult. And I think like, well, as a mother, I would never make those choices. So I automatically know that like, okay, I already feel like I am doing a better job for my son than, she did for me. I know what it felt like to be her child, and I know what it feels like to be his mother. And that difference in the love that I
Hmm.
felt as a kid and the love that I feel now, that's me. Like that
Hmm.
difference is me. And that's the work that I've been doing. That's the
Yeah.
healing work I've done. That's not because I had a good, motherly figure or metric for how to do things. It was the fact that I knew that was wrong is why I could, kind of twist it and do it differently. And so in a lot of ways, I guess I also need to be thankful, and I've been working on finding the gratitude for the fact that I had that. Like, I mean, when we think about bad mothers, I think we think about all the damage that they do, but the thing is that they also show us what not to do. And that is equally as powerful of a lesson for how we walk into the world as the damage of what they could do.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah. I think I agree. Can you tell us about when you finally had enough with your mother? Do you remember the exact breaking point?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I down to like the weather. um, 28 at the time. My stepfather had been diagnosed with prostate cancer and he had had a surgery. So I had gone back to my mother's house to like just spend a few days with him because one of his kind of like post surgery requirements was that he had to walk every hour, to 2 hours, keep moving. It was, and so I was like, I'll come and I'll hang out for a couple days. We'll go and we'll walk and like I'll just walk with them. And I always felt bad for my stepfather. My stepfather, he's had to deal with my mother far longer than any of us, and so so I always had kind of a little bit of a softer spot for him, in my heart, and so as we're walking, one of the walks, he talked about how my mother had sent a picture of me and my then 2-year-old son to my sexual abuser. And so this foster kid who had come to live with us when I was younger, he's the same age as me, and she had sent a picture of me and my son to him in prison, and he's in prison currently for doing the same thing to someone else's child that he had done to me. And at the time, my mother didn't believe me. When I told her what he was doing, she told me to stop making up stories. And when we found out that that's what he was in prison for, one would think like if you hadn't believed me before that you would believe me then, right? And she didn't. And she kept communicating with him, kept talking to him. She wrote him letters in prison. And I found out all of this while on these walks with my stepdad. And when I confronted my mother, she straight up lied to me, like looked me right in the eyes and said, I've not contacted him. I've not had anything. You asked me not to. I told you I wouldn't, and I didn't. And when I told her, well, but my stepdad just said you did. And she became very, very angry with him because he told the truth. But then with me, she finally looked at me in the eye and she goes, "Okay, so I did. So what? What are you going to do about it?" And in that moment, I just knew. I was like, she has repeatedly put me in danger. She has repeatedly not cared about what it is that I need in order to feel safe. So this person not knowing anything about me was part of what I needed in order to feel
Mm.
safe. And she just couldn't give me that. But then in addition to that, she gave him my son. And I just had these images flood through my head of this man holding this picture in a prison cell and looking at me, looking at my child, and I just felt nauseous. And I mean, even
Mhm.
now, like I'm sitting here as I talk about it, my stomach is swirling just to think about. And I just knew. I was like, I am never gonna matter to this person. I am never
Mm.
gonna matter more than they matter to themselves.
Mm.
And I'm not asking my mother to be 100% selfless, like that would be an unfair expectation. But when you have the opportunity to protect your kid and you repeatedly fail,
Mhm.
how many,
For no good reason
no
either, right?
reason,
What?
no reason other than the fact that she knew I didn't want it. And so she did. So she did it. And when she gave him this picture, it was a family friend who told me about the picture actually 2 weeks after I'd found out she'd been writing him back and confronted her about that. When I found out about the picture, it was like I just knew right then and there. Like I was like, she's never going to change. Like so the boundary that I had put in when I left, like when I asked her and she lied to me and then she said, "Yeah, I've been writing him, so what?" And I just packed up all my stuff because I was like, "Well, I can't even be around you. I can't look at you." And I just scooped everything up and I knew I needed to leave because I needed distance. I needed to think it through. And I had already, like at that point, I hadn't talked to her. By the time I talked to this family friend 2 weeks later, I still hadn't talked to my mother, and she hadn't reached out to be like, actually, it was pretty shitty of me, like nothing. There was no like reflection on her part in that time. And so when I found out that she'd gone to dinner with this family friend, told them about the picture, and then was laughing about it and was like, "Oh, if Megan was mad about me writing him, imagine what she would think about me sending a picture." And she thought it was funny.
Mm.
And yeah, I guess I knew right then and there, like she's never going to care about me. And it isn't that I've been pushing I wasn't pushing for her, if that makes any sense at all. I wasn't pushing for her to like kind of become somebody else. I was pushing for this idea of a mother that I had had and carried in my heart and thought that that's what eventually, maybe someday, she could find her way into being this idea of what a mother should be. And I realized in that moment, she's never going to be the idea. And I'm not actually going to miss her. I'm going to miss the idea. And I'm
Yeah.
okay missing an idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, realizing that that capacity for change isn't there is kind of at the root of all estrangement stories, isn't it? Because if a parent is willing to admit fault or take some responsibility or try to see our side, that could be everything. And when you know that that's not going to happen, when you finally realize it never will, then there really is no other option. And I think what stood out to me in those conversations you describe having with your stepfather when he was recovering, you wrote that I wanted him to say it. I wanted him to say I should have protected you. And that is such a simple sentiment that I think so many of us are desperate to hear that our parents just can't say for some reason. And we hear so many stories in the media about parents whose children are estranged from them, and the parents say they have no idea why, or they're desperate to reconnect. They miss their kids, they don't know what happened. I think just reading that might, give them some clarity, and parents who are capable of that. I think that's all some of us really need to hear is I should have done better. I'm sorry. But when that acknowledgement isn't there, then it's impossible to make a relationship work. It's like we're living in two different planets.
Yeah, two different understandings of the same experience. And it's as though I've never tried to like invalidate like my mother's kind of perception of things. I've never said like, well, you're wrong. I've just said, well, you didn't believe me or well, you didn't protect me. Like that all might have been whatever it is, might have also been true, but also like my part of it
Mm-hmm.
too, what I'm asking for, what I needed, what would have, as an adult, and I look back on it now, what would have made life a million times easier for me would have been if I would have been protected, if I would have been believed, if I, all of those kinds of things. And yeah, she was absolutely not ever going to be capable of that. And when and I've done a lot of work as I've been preparing. Like my son, we dropped him off for college just recently, and so I've been preparing for that. And so I've been doing a lot of reading and researching, preparing for like what this empty nester feeling might be, and all of that. And one of the things that is so powerful is the concept of rupture and repair. The idea that there are things that we do that cause those ruptures in relationships, and sometimes we're not cognizant of them, and we don't know, and so someone has to bring them to us. Sometimes it's about like I was reflecting back on all the things I felt like I should have done differently, or would have done, or wished I could have done differently with my son, and the conversation of, hey, I know that I wasn't the most present at times, or that I was struggling with my mental health at this time and that time, and that you had to, wear that. Like, I had those conversations with him before he went to college, and that allowed us to have that moment of repair. And it's not that he was expecting a perfect parent, just like any of us. I don't think any of us are expecting perfect parents. We are expecting parents who are accountable, who can say, yeah, I made a mistake. And if I could go back and do it differently, I would do it. I would do it like this because I know X, Y, or Z now
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't know then. Or I would, I wasn't aware, whatever the case might be. I think that if we had parents who could be that reflective and, and acknowledge their own humanity. Humans make mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can look at everything that my mother did, and I can say, yeah, she made a lot of mistakes, but I'm the only one who's saying that. And that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And as the one who was kind of on the receiving end of it, I get to say those were mistakes because of how they made me feel. And when we can't even talk to our parents about the mistakes they made because they can't accept them, that's so invalidating of
Mm-hmm.
our entire experience of what we feel, but also of our personhood. They invalidate our own humanity by saying that basically what we experienced is incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And like,
Mm-hmm.
no, you don't get to tell me what it felt like. I'm telling you what it felt like. And so repair says, I can understand how something felt for you and I can acknowledge my part in it. And I don't know, there's something about many parents that they're
Mm-hmm.
incapable of that next level of
Yeah.
self-awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's so interesting is um, there are parents like you who take what your mother did and want to do different and better. And there are others who, I guess it's just a matter of self-reflection, right? Who repeat the same patterns. And I wish we knew a way to break those patterns better because so much of the problematic relationships between parents and children probably does come down to generational trauma, right? So if we could recognize that sooner and break it, then we could prevent a lot of suffering.
Yeah, and I do think that the way that parenting has kind of been moving, right? Like the concept of gentle parenting, of rupture and repair, and these kinds of conversations where we're recognizing that kids are just tiny, they're tiny humans. They're not, imbeciles, right?
Mhm.
And so we're recognizing that even though they're little and maybe they don't have the same words for it, or they're younger and they don't have the words to kind of put it together, like we're not invalidating their experiences as much. And I
Mhm.
think growing up in a family full of people who, it kind of invalidated my experience, I can say like that is a massive game
Mhm.
changer for kids, right? Because we're saying that even as a little person, what you're feeling better than anybody, and that wasn't what I experienced. What I
Mhm.
experienced is what you're feeling is wrong all the
Mhm.
time, and so I was constantly made to feel that way. Now, because I think people are more open to the idea that we need to do more work, that parenting, like that we have to work on ourselves before we are parents. A lot of people are doing that, they're getting into therapy, those kinds of things. Those stigmas have come down. So I do think like future generations are doing it a
Mhm.
little bit more open-minded and a little bit more open to the idea that I, as a parent, can make mistakes, where like kind of these older generations, that's not true
Yeah.
because they were raised to believe parents can't make mistakes. Like, right? Their
Mhm.
parents didn't make mistakes, so they didn't make mistakes, and that's just how it is. You don't
Mhm.
question. And and so I do think that that's a sign of progress, right? And I do think the reason why that progress is happening is because more and more people are vocalizing, hey, I was in a toxic situation as a child. I know what it did to me, and I'm not going to let that continue on with
Mhm.
my kid. And there's communities that are being built around protecting the idea and the innocence of childhood, and and saying like I'm going to be a better parent than my parents
Yeah.
were,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I am going to hold myself more accountable to my child than my parents held themselves to me.
Well, thank you. I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you very much. The book is Everwoven, and can you tell us when it is available?
Yeah, so it's coming out October 7th, and it'll be available on Amazon, but then you can also request it at any like local indie bookstore as well, and they'll order it for you as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Bad Mothers is written, produced, and edited by me, Monica Cardenas. I'd love it if you'd rate and review the show and get in touch with any feedback. You can find me on my Substack, and guess what? It's called Bad Mothers too.